When the plume of radioactive material rose on the night of April 26th, the winds carried it to the northwest, into Latvia, Lithuania, northern Poland, and across the Baltic Sea into Scandinavia. On the second day, the winds changed, blowing to the west and southwest, passing over southern Poland, Austria, southern Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and France. On the fifth day, another wind change, back to the northwest, and the cloud moved into central Germany, the Netherlands, and Great Britain. Eventually, the winds blew northeast, spreading the fallout into central Russia. Some radioactive material rode the jet stream over the United States and other countries. In all, more than 20 countries received fallout from Chernobyl, and countermeasures varied. In some countries, milk and fresh vegetables were banned. In other countries, like Poland, potassium iodide was distributed to children to protect against thyroid cancer. Hardest hit were the Lapp people of northern Sweden. The reindeer herds they depend on for their livelihood were found to be so contaminated by radiation they were unfit for human consumption. Across Europe, the amount of contamination depended on whether it was raining at the time the cloud passed over.
I was on a sabbatical in the small town of Konstanz in southern Germany on the Swiss border, and I went there to do some physics research with some colleagues. Then on Wednesday it rained all day. I remembered that rain brings down radioactivity from the nuclear weapons tests in Nevada. So I thought, well, maybe we can measure something after all, even though we decided we couldn't measure anything. And I was very surprised, because what we found was that the radiation level outside the building was about 40 times the radiation level inside the building. And this was a staggering fact to me, that it could be that high. By morning, we had a spectrum which told us just about everything we wanted to know about that reactor, because we were finding on the ground in Konstanz, Germany, the entire core contents of the reactor. All the different isotopes, the radionuclides that you expect inside the reactor, were lying on the ground in Germany.
Nearly 400 million people were exposed to Chernobyl's fallout, and the effects are still fiercely debated. The controversy is focused around one question: how many cases of cancer can be expected as a result of the accident?
The number of cases in the West, that is outside the Soviet Union, will be maybe 2,000.
One can make an estimate, and it's a pretty good estimate, that about 20,000 people throughout the whole world in their whole lives will get cancer from this cause.
From my perspective, we're not talking about 31 acute fatalities. We're talking about whether or not we're going to see 250,000, 500,000 cancers appearing in the population as a result of this accident.
Estimates range from 0 to over 500,000. One reason for the debate is that no one is certain how dangerous low levels of radiation are. Some of the information we do have centers around studies of what happened here. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been studied since their exposure in 1945 to the high levels of radiation from 2 atomic bombs. Those who survived the initial explosion were hit with large doses of radiation which penetrated the body and destroyed its cells. Those closest died within minutes. Others exposed to lower levels of radiation died within months, as radiation damaged rapidly dividing cells in vital organs like blood-producing bone marrow. Those still further away, exposed to even lower levels of radiation, showed no immediate health effects. But how does exposure to low levels of radiation affect an individual's chance of getting cancer? For the people exposed to radiation from Chernobyl, it's a difficult question to answer.
The first one is what doses did people really get? There are a lot of uncertainties there. Not everybody had a dosimeter, not everybody had, there weren't measurements on what everybody ate.
Complicating the question is the fact that many of those exposed will get cancer from other sources.
It'll be very difficult to determine how many of the cancers actually were from Chernobyl as from other effects in the population. So we may never know what the actual level of risks from this accident will be.
Chernobyl may lead to a greater understanding of the effects of low-level radiation if the Soviets successfully carry out their plans to conduct lifelong studies of the 135,000 people evacuated after the accident. The human costs of Chernobyl will be debated well into the next century. But as we walked through the streets of Kiev, it was easy to see that already, in many ways, life had returned to normal here. The city of 2.5 million goes about its business as usual. In the days after the accident, fleets of water trucks washed the city's streets day and night. But today, the streets are considered clean and safe once again. Street vendors are again allowed. Apples can be sold on a corner, no longer requiring a radiation check. The leaves were buried, not burned this year, but now the trees stand ready for a new spring. 3 years ago, the most dramatic effect of Chernobyl here was that tens of thousands of children were sent away to avoid harm from radiation. Now, the children are home. But for some people, doubts and fears linger. They are uncertain about their future. Plans to have children are postponed. They ascribe all kinds of illnesses to their radiation exposure. And there are even occasional rumors, as there were after the accident, that thousands of victims were secretly buried. But officials deny the rumors and maintain that there is no danger. They point out that food markets are no longer subject to restrictions. Warnings of contaminated milk and vegetables have been lifted. The outward appearance is that the danger is gone. Still, Chernobyl has left its mark. After the accident, immediate changes were made in the Soviet nuclear policy. Specific changes were made in response to specific lessons.
The primary lesson is one that a number of experts have been saying for 30 years, that you can't depend on just one thing in safety. They were depending on careful operation and rigid adherence to rules to overcome an instability in their reactor design.
All 15 of the Soviets' RBMK reactors were shut down and retrofitted. Changes were made to decrease the time it takes to put the control rods back into the reactor core. The minimum number of control rods to be kept in the core was raised from 30 to 80. No more RBMK reactors will be started, although several under construction will be completed. Also, changes were made in the training of staff and in the management hierarchy.
We changed the status of the personnel. We changed completely the schedule, because before Chernobyl, sometimes we hire personnel only in a few months before completion of the station. Today, it's a long time before.
One lesson of Chernobyl is that the people who operate the reactor must be well informed, and that there must be regulations, and the regulations have to be obeyed. In Russia, that is very often not the case, because if you obeyed all regulations in Russia, you couldn't live.
From a simply human point of view, Chernobyl shows what can result when someone does not do their job properly, when people don't take the responsibilities seriously and fully.
The seriousness of the human error was driven home with a trial of the men responsible for running the plant. 6 were found guilty of gross violations of safety regulations and sentenced to Soviet labor camps. The changes in nuclear policy were the first, most obvious response to Chernobyl. But for the Russian people, there was a different lesson. Chernobyl taught them that nuclear energy cannot come with guarantees that it is 100% safe. With the new policy of glasnost, of openness in the Soviet Union, questions about safety have turned into a vocal opposition to nuclear power.